Chapter 5 Quasimodo. In the wink of an eye, everything was ready to carry out Copnol's suggestion. Burghers, students, Basokians had set to work. The small chapel opposite the marble table was chosen for the scene of the face-making contest. A pane of glass broken out of the beautiful rose window above the door left an empty ring of stone through which it was agreed that the contestants would pass their heads. To reach it, they had only to stand on two barrels, which had been procured from somewhere or other, and set one upon the other rather precariously. It was decided that each candidate, male or female, for you could have a female pope, in order to leave a vivid impression of his grin, should cover his face and remain unseen in the chapel until the moment of making an appearance at the hole. In an instant the chapel was filled with contestants, and the door was closed behind them. Copnol from his seat in the gallery ordered, directed, and arranged everything. During all this confusion, the cardinal, no less disconcerted than Gringoire, on pretext of business at the hour of vespers, had retired with his entire train, and the crowd, which had been so noisily aroused by his arrival, seemed not in the least interested in his departure. Guillaume Rime was the only one who noticed the discomfiture of his eminence. Popular attention, like the sun, pursued its revolution. After rising at one end of the hall, it had stayed for a while in the middle of it, and was now setting at the other end. The marble table, the draped gallery, each had its moment. Now it was the turn of Louis XI's chapel. The field was henceforward open for every sort of folly. The Flemings and the rabble had the whole hall to themselves. The making of faces began. The first to appear in the hole, with eyelids turned inside out, with mouth wide open, with forehead wrinkled like the hussar boots of the Empire period, excited such a burst of inextinguishable laughter that Homer would have taken all these boors for gods. Nevertheless, the great hall was anything but an Olympus, as Gringoire's poor Jupiter, better than anyone, could well attest. A second face and a third followed, then another, and with each face the rollicking laughter redoubled and the stamping of feet grew louder. This spectacle produced in everyone a certain twirling in the brain, a certain intoxication and fascination almost impossible to describe to the reader of our day, or to the habitué of our modern drawing-rooms. Just imagine a series of faces, presenting successfully every geometric figure, from the triangle to the trapezium, from the cone to the polyhedron, every human expression, from anger to lust, every age, from the wrinkles of a newborn babe to the wrinkles of an old lady on the verge of death, every religious phantasm, from Faunus to Beelzebub, every animal profile, from the jowl to the beak, from the snout to the muzzle. Picture to yourself all the grotesque heads sculptured on the Pont Neuf, those nightmares carved by the hand of Germain Pilon, taking life and breath, and coming one after the other to sear your face with their flaming eyes. All the masks of a Venetian carnival passing in succession before you. In short, a human kaleidoscope. The orgy became more and more Flemish. Teniers himself would have given but a very imperfect idea of it. Imagine, if you can, a battle of Salvator Rosa bacchanalized. It was no longer any distinction between people. Students, ambassadors, burghers, men, women. All were the same. There was now neither a Clopin Twifou, nor a Gilles Le Cornu, nor a Marie Quatlive, nor a Robin Poussin. All identity was lost in common license. The great hall was nothing more than one vast furnace of audacity and joviality, in which every mouth was a shout, every eye a flash, every face a grin, every individual a gesticulation. All was shouting and roaring. The strange faces that followed one after another, gnashing their teeth in the window, were like so many brands cast into the fire. And from all that effervescent mob there escaped, like vapor from a furnace, a sharp, shrill, hissing noise, like the buzzing wings of 10,000 gnats.
"Curses!
Look at that face! That's nothing. Let's have another. Guillemette Maugepieux? Look at that bull's head. It has everything but horns. Isn't that your husband? There's another. For God's sake, what's that? Hey, that's cheating. You're only allowed to show your face. That devil Perrette Calbot. Just like her. Noel! Noel! This is too much. Here's one whose ears can't get through, etc., etc. We must, however, do justice to our friend Jehan. In the midst of all this commotion, you could still see him on the top of his pillar, like a sailor on the topsail, carrying on like a wild man. His mouth was wide open, as from it came a cry that no one could hear, not that it was drowned by the general din, intense as that was, but because, no doubt, it had reached the limit of audible high notes. The 12,000 vibrations of Sauveur, or the 8,000 of Biot. As for Gringoire, as soon as the first moment of depression was over, he had regained his composure. He had hardened himself in the face of adversity. Go on, he had said for the third time to his actors, his speaking machines. Then, pacing with long strides in front of the marble table, he was seized with a wild notion to go and take his turn at the hole in the chapel window, if only to have the pleasure of making a face at this ungrateful mob. But no, he said to himself, that would be unworthy of us, no vengeance. We will fight to the end. The power of poetry over the people is great. I shall bring them back. We shall see which of the two shall overcome. Funny faces or belles lettres. Alas, he was the only spectator of his play. It was even worse than before, for now he saw nothing but backs. No, I am wrong. The big, long, suffering man whom he had consulted at a critical moment still faced the stage. As for Gisquette and Liénard, they had left long since. Gringoire was moved to the bottom of his heart by the fidelity of this audience of one. He went over to him, tugged him gently by the arm, for the good man was leaning against the barricade, dozing a little. Monsieur, said Gringoire. Thank you. Sir, answered the man with a yawn. What for? I see what annoys you, replied our poet. All this noise and confusion prevent you from hearing comfortably. But never mind, your name shall pass on to posterity. What is your name, please? Renaud Chateau, keeper of the seal of the Châtelet of Paris, at your service. Monsieur, said Gringoire, you are the sole representative of the muses among this vast audience. You are too kind, sir, replied the keeper of the seal of the Châtelet. You are the only one, continued Gringoire, kind enough to pay any attention to my play. How do you like it? Replied the big magistrate, but half awake. Quite funny indeed. Gringoire had to be content with this bit of eulogy, for a thunder of applause, mingled with a prodigious acclamation, cut short their conversation. The fool's pope was at last chosen. Noel! Noel! Shouted the people on all sides. It was indeed a marvelous face that now beamed through the circular window. After all the faces, pentagonal, hexagonal, and heteroclite, that had followed each other at this window without fully appreciating the idea of the grotesque which the crowd had fabricated in their imaginations so excited by the orgy, it required nothing less, to win all the votes, than the sublime face which had just now dazzled the assemblage. Even Master Coppenole roundly applauded, and Clopin Twifou, who had been in the running, and God knows the degree of ugliness his face could assume, acknowledged himself defeated. We shall do likewise. We shall not try to describe for the reader that tetrahedron nose, that horseshoe mouth, that small left eye obscured by red, bushy eyebrows, the right eye which disappeared completely under an enormous wart, those jagged teeth, with gaps here and there, like the battlements of a fortress, that horny lip, over which one of those teeth protruded like the tusk of an elephant, that forked chin, and, above all, the expression on the whole face, a mixture of malice, astonishment, and sadness. Let the reader, if he can, imagine the whole of it. The applause was unanimous, spontaneous, and overwhelming. All rushed toward the chapel. In triumph, the lucky Pope of Fools was let out. But it was then the admiration and the surprise of the crowd reached its height. The grimace they had applauded was his natural face. Rather, his whole person was a grimace. His enormous head bristled with red hair. Between his shoulders was an enormous hump, counterbalanced by a protuberance in front. He had a framework of thighs and legs so strangely askew that they could touch only at the knees, and, seen from the front, resembled two sickles joined together at the handles. The feet were huge, the hands monstrous. Yet with all that deformity was a certain fearsome appearance of vigor, agility, and courage, a strange exception to the eternal rule prescribing that strength, like beauty, shall result from harmony. Such was the Pope whom the fools had chosen. He looked like a giant that had been broken and badly repaired. When this sort of Cyclops appeared on the threshold of the chapel, motionless, chunky, and almost as broad as he was high, the square of his base, as one great man puts it, the populace immediately recognized him by his coat, half red and half purple, sprinkled with little silver bells, and especially by the perfection of his ugliness. The populace recognized him, I say, and cried out with one voice, "It's Quasimodo, the bell ringer! It's Quasimodo, the Hunchback of Notre-Dame! Quasimodo the one-eyed! Quasimodo the bow-legged! Noel! Noel!" The poor wretch, it seems, had a number of nicknames. "Let all pregnant women beware!" cried the students. "Or those who want to be," added Joanne. The women in fact hid their faces. "Oh, that hideous ape!" said one. "As wicked as he is ugly," replied another. "It's the devil," added a third. "Unfortunately, I live near Notre-Dame, and at night I often hear him roaming about in the gutters. With the cats. He's always on our rooftops. He casts spells at us down our chimneys. The other night he came and made faces at me through my window. I thought it was a man. How afraid I was! I am sure he goes to meet with witches. Once he left a broomstick on my leads. Oh, that ugly hunchback! That vile creature!" On the contrary, the men were delighted and applauded loudly. Quasimodo, the object of the tumult, stood in the doorway of the chapel, weird and grave, letting himself be admired. One of the students, Robin Poussepan, I do believe, came up close and laughed in his face. Quasimodo, without a word, simply grabbed him by the belt and hurled him a full 10 paces into the crowd. Master Copnol, amazed, went over to him. "God's cross! Holy St. Peter! You are the ugliest creature I have ever seen. You deserve to be Pope of Rome as well as of Paris." So saying, he good-naturedly rested his hand on the monster's shoulder. Quasimodo did not move. Copnol continued, "You're a fellow with whom I have a longing to carouse, though it should cost me a new dozen of 12 tournois. What do you say?" Quasimodo made no reply. "By God, are you deaf?" cried the hosier. In fact, Quasimodo was. However, he was beginning to lose patience with Copnol's manner. Suddenly he turned on him with such a snarl that the Flemish giant recoiled like a bulldog before a cat. A circle of terror and respect then formed around the strange personage, the radius of which was at least 15 geometrical paces. An old lady explained to Master Copnol that Quasimodo was deaf. "Deaf?" cried the hosier with his boisterous Flemish laugh. "By God, then he is a pope!" "Ha, I know him!" shouted Jehan, who was now coming down the pillar to catch a closer look at Quasimodo. "He's my brother's bell ringer. Good day to you, Quasimodo." "A devil of a man," said Robin Poussepan, bruised from his fall. "He shows himself he's a hunchback. He walks, he's bow-legged, he looks at you, and he has only one eye. You speak to him, but he is deaf. Why, what does this Polyphemus do with his tongue?" "He speaks when he wishes," said the old woman. "The ringing of the bells has made him deaf, but he's not dumb." "So that is lacking to him," observed Jehan. "And he has one eye too many," added Robin Poussepan. "Not so," said Jehan judiciously. "A one-eyed man is much more incomplete than a blind man." for he knows what it is that's lacking. Meanwhile, all the beggars, all the lackeys, all the pickpockets, together with the students, had gone in procession to fetch the wardrobe from the basoche, the wardrobe of the basoche, the pasteboard tiara, and the mock robe worn in derision by the fool's pope. Quasimodo allowed himself to be clothed in them with a kind of proud docility. They then seated him on a motley colored chair. 12 officers of the Brotherhood of Fools hoisted him to their shoulders, and a kind of bitter and disdainful joy seemed to spread over the morose face of the Cyclops when he beheld under his deformed feet all those heads of good-looking and well-shaped men. Then the whole roaring, ragged procession set out to make, according to custom, the internal circuit of the galleries of the palace before parading in the streets and public squares of the city. Chapter 6 La Esmeralda. We are delighted to inform our readers that during the whole of this scene Gringoire and his play held out. His actors, spurred on by him, had not discontinued their enactment of the play, nor had he ceased to give it his full attention. Gringoire had contributed his share to the general uproar, and was determined to proceed to the end, confident that the public's attention would again be captured. This spark of hope became brighter when he saw Quasimodo, Cobb, and the whole noisy cortege of the Pope of Fools clamorously leave the hall. The mob rushed out after them. "Good," he said to himself, "we are all rid of those rabble-rousers." Unfortunately, the rabble-rousers were the whole assembly. In a twinkling of an eye, the great hall was empty. It is true there still remained a few spectators, some scattered about, and others grouped around the pillars. Women, old men, and children who had had enough of the noise and confusion. A few of the students, too, still remained, straddling the entablature of the windows, and looking out onto the square. Well, thought Gringoire, here are still some to hear the end of my mystery. They are few, but a select audience, a literate audience. But a moment afterward, a symphony which was to have emphasized the arrival of the Holy Virgin was missing. Gringoire noticed that his music had been swept away in the procession of the fool's pope. "Skip that," he said stoically. He approached a group of townspeople who seemed to him to be talking about his play. He caught only scraps of their conversation. "Master Chanteau, you recall the Hôtel de Navarre, which belonged to Monsieur de Nemours?" "Yes, opposite the chapel of Braque. Well, the Minister of Finance has just leased it to Guillaume Alexandre, that writer of historical subjects, for 6 livres 8 sols parisis a year." "How rents are rising!" "So," said Gringoire with a sigh. "Well, those others are listening." "Comrades!" suddenly cried one of the young fellows in the window. "La Esmeralda! It's La Esmeralda down in the square!" The word had a magical effect. All who were left in the hall rushed toward the windows, climbing up the walls to see, repeating, "La Esmeralda! La Esmeralda!" At the same time a thunder of applause rose from the square. "What do they mean by La Esmeralda?" said Gringoire, wringing his hands in despair. "Oh, my God, it appears that the windows are the attraction now." He turned toward the marble table and saw that the performance had stopped. It was precisely the moment when Jupiter was to appear with his thunder. But Jupiter was standing motionless below the edge of the stage. "Michel Gibbon!" cried the irritated poet. "What are you doing? Is that your role? Go up!" "Alas!" exclaimed Jupiter, "one of the students has just taken the ladder away." Gringoire looked. It was but too true. All communication between his plot and its denouement was cut off. "Rogue," he muttered. "But why did he take the ladder?" "To go see Esmeralda," cried Jupiter in a piteous tone. "Say," he said, "here's a ladder no one is using," and off he went with it. This was the last blow. Gringoire received it with resignation. "May the devil take you all," he said to the players, And if they pay me, I'll pay you. Then he made his retreat, hanging his head, but still the last on the field, like a general who has fought well. And as he descended the winding stairs of the palace, "What a fine mob of asses and boobies these Parisians are," he grumbled. "They come to a mystery, but hear none of it. They paid attention to everyone else. To Clopin Trouillefou, the Cardinal, Coppenol, Quasimodo, the devil, but to Our Lady the Virgin, not at all. If I'd known it, I'd have given you Virgin Marys, you wretched fools. Me, to come here to see faces and to see nothing but backs. To be a poet and to have the success of an apothecary. True, Homer begged his way through the Greek towns, and Naso did in exile among the Muscovites. But may the devil strangle me if I understand what they meant by this Esmeralda. What kind of a word is that? It must be Egyptian."